It is good to see you. If you have a Bible, let's go to Daniel chapter 6. And today we are wrapping up this study on the book of Daniel. And I know some of you are going, well, wait a second. I see like Daniel 7 and 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And some of you, when I told you when I was going to be doing the book of Daniel, like before we even started, there were some of you who were like, all right, I've been waiting for this. Because there's lots of prophecy, there's lots of like end time, apocalyptic kind of type like teaching and visions and dreams and all this. And that's chapters 7 through 12. And we're not going to be covering that, all right? And so you'll read, when you read about the book of Daniel, you'll see that it is written actually as two books within this one book. And we are covering the first book, the Daniel 1 through 6. And so today we're wrapping it up. And I don't know if there's another book in the Bible that gives us as clear of a picture of how to live your life devoted to God in a culture that completely just wants to like reject God and get you to reject God. And that's significant to us because Daniel was taken out of his country. He was taken away from his people, away from his family, and he was deported to Babylon, a nation with a culture that is very similar to the culture that we know here in America. This is, you and I, we live right now, the nation that we live in is a lot of similarities in that we live in a culture that is certainly has gone full on post-Christian. We are no less spiritual than we had been, but we are certainly more skeptical of God, more skeptical of the Bible than ever, and we are certainly more opposed to religion than we have ever been. And it comes to us, this culture coming at our faith, it comes to us in different ways. And one of the ways, there's certainly a growing number of people that are coming at Christianity, it just blatantly coming at our faith, coming at Christianity in the classroom, in public schools, in universities, coming at Christianity in the media, those that you go to school with, those that you work with. And often the way that conversation goes, or the way that goes, is it works its way out like this. Hey, if that's what you want to believe, then fine. Just believe that. If that's what you believe, then great. You just believe that. Good for you, but keep it to yourself. Like don't be bringing that into the workplace. Don't be bringing that to school. Don't be bringing that into your relationships. Especially where it might affect me. Like if that's what you want to believe, that's cool. Just keep it private. Don't bring it out in the open. Now that's one way that our culture is coming at Christianity, but perhaps the most effective way that our culture gets us to reject God and live and not live as followers of Jesus is just by removing any thought of God in our culture, by removing any idea of God in our culture, by just ignoring God altogether, ignoring his ways altogether, and not making it a statement about, well, I know that the Christians teach this, so we're coming at this. That's not it. It's just like, we're just not even going to talk about it. We're just not even going to make a thing about it. We're just not even going to mention it. We're just going to ignore God, ignore the way in which the Christians think altogether and how life was made to be lived. It's not blatantly in opposition. It's more insidious. It works underneath, and it is incredibly, incredibly effective in taking Christians out. It's not that Christians are outright denying Jesus. That's not my reality. I don't just walk around hearing like stories of like deconversion all the time. That's not it. But what's happening, what I see happening all the time, are Christians getting pulled into the way of culture to where they say that they are Christians, but they live their lives. The way they live their lives and leave their families, they do it in such a way that God is nothing more than just a superstition, or at best, he's sentimental. The way that they live their lives and how it would say that God is not God. The way that they live their lives would say that his ways are not good, that his word has no authority over our lives. His word has really no authority. It's up to me whether I want to choose what I want to choose, and if I decide some of it, I like some of this, I don't like some of it. That's up to me. His word really has no authority over my life, over my relationships, how I spend my time, how I spend my money. And here's the danger that we don't see in the moment. Because here's the thing. We're just living life. We're Christians that are just living life. Like, we're just trying to follow Jesus. But here's the thing. When we just live our lives and get caught up in the way of culture, get caught up in like, hey, it's just busy. I just got to go here, got to do that. We've got this thing going on. We got this thing going on. I'm chasing after this. I got to get this. I'm hoping to buy this. I'm hoping to get this position. Like, it's just part of American culture. And the thing is we get caught up in it. In the moment, we don't see it. In the moment, we don't see that we are diminishing God's word. In the moment, we don't see that we are rejecting faith. In the moment, we're just doing life. And let me tell you, the danger of that is that it only takes one or two generations of that kind of Christianity before faith becomes non-existent in that family. So the question that we're asking is, so how does that not happen to us? Like, how do we maintain faith in a culture that wants us to move away from God? How do you stand firm and even push back against a culture that is wanting us to reject God? We're closing out this study in chapter 6. So let me just catch us up. Daniel was 15 or 16 years old. He was smart. He was good looking. He came from a good family, had a bright future ahead of him. And Babylon came into Jerusalem and took not only Daniel, but took 10,000 of those just like Daniel and took them back 900 miles away to Babylon and put them through the Babylonian machine. Like they did everything they could to blatantly take Israel and the worship of their God out of them and put Babylon and the worship of their gods in them. And yet, by the time that we get to chapter 6, Daniel is in his 80s and he has not flinched. His faith has not wavered. But chapter 6 perhaps brings Daniel the biggest test of his faith. We left off with chapter 5 where King Belshazzar, he has a party in the palace. You remember this. His dad is out, finding himself with this new god that he's worshiping. And in the meantime, Belshazzar is put in place. He's in charge. Dad's away. He has a party at the palace. It was a display of drunken, demonic mockery of God. And the party comes to an end when this hand appears it was writing on the wall. And the king is freaked out. He calls all his wise men in and go figure. None of the wise men had any idea what was going on. They could not understand the hand. They could not understand the writing on the wall. They had no idea what was going on. Then Belshazzar's mom is going, hey, king, maybe you ought to bring in Daniel, because I remember Daniel, this guy, he was able to do some kind of crazy stuff with like interpreting dreams and that kind of thing. And so maybe you got to bring in Daniel. He's still around. He's still living. You got to bring him in. So he brings in Daniel and says, Daniel, hey, can you tell me what's going on here? And Daniel looks at the writing on the wall and he says, yeah, you're done, king. Like, it's over for you. The kingdom is done. You're done. Literally, the writing is on the wall. It's over. And Belshazzar says, thank you very much. Here's a gold chain. Here's a purple robe. I'll make you third in command in all of the kingdom. And he's just going, okay, I don't know what that's all about. I'm just glad I got some clarity and let's just go on with life. And that night, the Medes and the Persians invade Babylon, kill the king, and take over the empire. And we'll pick it up in the last verse in chapter 5. It says this, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom being about 62 years old. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account. So another king comes and goes. So we went through kind of the line of kings since Nebuchadnezzar, since Daniel had been in Babylon. Another king comes and goes. Another kingdom comes and goes. But Daniel, the symbol of the kingdom of God, here he is. He remains. Daniel has seen Nebuchadnezzar. He's seen 4 or 5 other kings, including Belshazzar, come and go. And now the Medes and the Persians have arrived in Babylon with a new king, Darius. And Daniel is still serving the King of Kings. And he's become, he's been elevated. Daniel's been elevated. Darius there's something going on here where he puts Daniel as like, of all the leadership in all of the kingdom, he reorganizes the government and puts these 3 high officials really in charge of everybody. And Daniel was one of those guys. And it says this, here's why Darius did what he did. He said, so that the king might suffer no loss. so that the king might suffer no loss. So new kingdom, new circumstances, same problems. Another kingdom with an insecure, power-hungry king. But here's the thing. Daniel serves the king well. It says in verse 3, then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was with him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So Daniel, once again, has the eye of the king, as he has in the past, and it is up for this big promotion, all right? So he's been like, Darius is looking at this guy, he's like I want to make sure that I'm well taken care of, and this Daniel, man, he's just making it happen. He is making me flourish in this kingdom. And I'm getting rich off this guy. And so he's going, I'm going to make this guy the number one. I'm going to reorganize again. I'm going to make this guy the number one. Verse 4, then the high officials, so these other two guys, and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful. And no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps and the counselors and the governors are all agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed and according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. So these guys, these other officials, they're upset that Daniel of all people, the guy that, he's a foreigner. He's from weak Israel. He's been brought here. He was held captive. They're upset that Daniel was going to be promoted above them, so they come up with this plan. And let me just say, it's brilliant. All right? It's a brilliant plan. These guys have a brilliant plan. How do you get an insecure king's attention? You stroke his ego. That's what you do. So they're like, King, we got a great idea. Here's what we think you should do. And when I say we, I mean all of us leaders, all of us officials, all of us governors, all of us satraps, like all of us. Is that true? Were they all in agreement? No, that was not true. It was a lie. Daniel was certainly not in on this, but they're going, hey, we've all agreed. All of your leaders here, all of your staff, we've all agreed. King, we think that it would be a great display of unity and loyalty to you and to this kingdom, that if you would make an edict that would declare you God for the month. Nobody prays or asks anything from any god but you, King. And if anyone doesn't go along with it, then obviously they're not loyal to you and they're not loyal to the kingdom, so we should just throw them to the lions. What do you think? Well, what do you think he's going to say? He's going, I think that's a great idea. I think we should do that. And so Darius signs it, and he puts it into play for the next 30 days. Nobody prays to anybody but me. Nobody asks of anything, of any god, except me for 30 days. Verse 10. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Now, Daniel, he knows what's going on. He knows the plan that's been put in place, and he knows that this whole God of the month idea is a trap to take him out. So what's Daniel going to do? Well, Daniel, he's got some options. He's got some options here. He could go along with it. It's only 30 days. It's not that he had to pray to the king. The king just said, don't pray to anybody but me. He could just not pray. 30 days, he's not going to pray. Or at least he could not pray publicly. He could kind of play the both sides, do the reversible jersey kind of thing. Like in public, he's like, oh, King Darius, you're a great guy. You're a great king. And then in private, he can go and pray to God and just continue on what he's been doing. It's not like he was It's not like this was an edict to murder somebody. This was simply about prayer. And it's not like God commanded prayer to be made, prayer to be done in public. And it's 30 days. It's 30 days. And Daniel is in his 80s, for Pete's sake. He's been faithful for a long, long time. I think God knows where he stands. So what's the big deal? Well, apparently it was a big deal. Because as soon as Daniel hears about the law being signed, what is his first response? He's not freaking out. He's not running to the king. First things first, he prays. And he doesn't just pray. We get some details here. We get some details on what that moment looked like when Daniel went home. He goes home, he opens the windows toward Jerusalem, gets on his knees, and he prays out loud. And we know that this wasn't just in this moment. This wasn't just an act of defiance. It certainly was a prayer of defiance in that moment. But it wasn't that's not what that was about necessarily. Because this is something it said as he had done previously. This is just what he always did. This is just what he had always been doing. He opened the windows, he prayed toward Jerusalem, faced Jerusalem, and he got on his knees and he prayed out loud. And so we read things like this and we're like, so what is up with that? So what's up with the whole windows open, Jerusalem, on your knees 3 times a day? Is this something we should be doing? Is this something that we've missed somewhere? Is this commanded in the Bible? We've just not found, we've just overlooked. Is this commanded? No, it's not commanded. It's the whole open windows, Jerusalem, on your knees 3 times a day. It's not commanded. Is it helpful? I think so. I think it's helpful. Praying toward Jerusalem, this was not like superstition that Daniel was in on here. John Calvin, a brilliant theologian and pastor from the 1500s, once said about this. He said, it seemed that Daniel did this as an aid to prayer. That there are times when prayer becomes nothing more than just discipline or routine. You ever felt that? Like it's just, I'm supposed to be doing this right now, so I'll do it. It's routine. It's just what, have you ever, I don't know what your routine or your rhythm is with like sitting down to eat. Like in our family, which is what we do. We sit down and we pray and then we eat. And if somebody doesn't, like we don't pray and someone has eaten, like you're like, it's like something's going to happen. I don't know, but something's going to happen. No, I'm just kidding. And I find myself, I'll pray and then we eat and I have no idea what I just said. I have no idea. It just rolled out. Like, all right, on your mark, get set, go. I might as well said. It made no sense. It was just routine, just out of my mouth. And so sometimes prayer gets that way. Sometimes prayer just becomes, I'm doing this because I should. I'm doing this because it's what I've always done. And sometimes what Calvin is saying here, what he thinks that maybe Daniel is doing here, is he's using this as an aid to prayer. You need something to wake you up to what's happening in prayer. For Daniel, he has been taken far from home, far from God's people, far from the worship of God in the temple. And it could have been that Daniel would open up his window and face Jerusalem to remind himself that even after 70 years of living in this place, 70 years living in Babylon away from his home, it was a reminder that I do not belong here. This is not my home. I'm in exile. I'm a stranger here. I have a citizenship. My loyalties are somewhere else. And when you think about your life, when you think about the things that stir up your affection for God, the things that remind you of who you are, that remind you of God's faithfulness in your life. You think about, the things that when it's happening, then you're reminded of what prayer is really about. Maybe for you, it's having worship music on. Maybe for you, it's being at a certain place. Perhaps I've heard a lot of people say, when I'm outside in nature, it just seems like that I'm most aware of God's presence and who He is and who I am. Or maybe there's a picture of something that you have in your house or with you that just reminds you of God's faithfulness to you. You remember that time. You remember what God did. Maybe you remember what God did in your life at that time. Or maybe there's something else. Maybe there's something else that to remind you of who you are and who you belong to. Listen, you should use those. You should use those in the same way that Daniel would open the windows and face Jerusalem to be faithful and fervent in prayer. And it says that he prayed on his knees. Are we commanded to pray on our knees? No, we're not commanded to pray on our knees, but we do see about 30 times in Scripture that people are on their knees in prayer. But we also see that people in Scripture would be standing in prayer, or they would be face down, bowing down in prayer. The physical posture of prayer is not what is significant, but the posture of your heart is. And isn't it true that oftentimes your physical posture can reflect the posture of your heart? It's like this. If you were standing in front of me just randomly and you put like your hands up here and like you're sticking your tongue out at me, like I'm not just going to go like, oh, it's interesting how you put your hands up there, your tongue stick. Like you're saying something, right? Without saying something, you're saying something. Your physical posture is saying, your posture speaks. And kneeling to pray reminds you, and it says to God that you recognize who you are and you recognize who he is, that he is the king and I am the servant, that he's not my errand boy that just meets my demands, that he's here to just make sure that everything goes well in my life, that he should do everything that I ask him to do. But I am a beggar at the throne of grace. It's a throne of grace, but it's still a throne. The king signs the law. And so for 30 days, nobody prays to anybody but King Darius. And Daniel goes to his house and he does what he's always done. It's not like he's trying to be obnoxious. He's not even trying to make a point. He's just opening the window. This is what he does. And he opens the window and he gets on his knees and 3 times a day, just praying out loud. Just praying out loud. It says, then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within the next 30 days, except for you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, he pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel, and he labored until the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then at daybreak, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. This is crazy. Like, this king is stressed. This king, he doesn't want his own pagan idolatry to affect Daniel. And he is stressed out about it. And so he comes to the den and he says, the king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" The king is putting his hope in a God that he does not believe in yet. This is crazy. Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angels and shut the mouths of lions, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and also blameless before you. O king, I have done no harm." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, And those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions. They, their children, and their wives. Now, I didn't get that when I was a kid. That wasn't on the flannel graph when I was a kid. It just ended with Daniel's like, I'm saved. We didn't get this, right? And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Now, here's what's interesting. In case you were wondering, because, skeptics of all kinds would say, well, the lions, they just weren't hungry that night. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. And he who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Now, many scholars will say, as I was reading this week and studying this week, I didn't know this, but many scholars would say that Darius and Cyrus are the same person. The same person. It's the same guy. In fact, in some versions of the Bible, maybe you have a version of the Bible that says this. Instead of saying that Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian, it says something like this: Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, that is the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Now, here's why that is significant. Because in that same year, Jeremiah tells us that King Cyrus told the exiles that had been taken out of Babylon, he told them to go back home and to rebuild the temple that was demolished by the Babylonians. 70 years and multiple kings, and 2 kingdoms later, these Jews are told to go back home and rebuild the temple. How in the world does that happen? Because all that time, I'll tell you, the whole time, God had a man in Babylon who never forgot who he was and refused to fall in to the way of the culture. And God used him to turn an empire, a pagan empire. How? Perhaps was it through power and authority? Because Daniel certainly had it. He was elevated to these positions. He at one point under Nebuchadnezzar, he was number 2 in all the land. He was getting ready to be made number 2 again. He had the power. He had the authority. Is this what he did? Did he take that and leverage that and use it to turn this empire toward God? Is this what's going on? No, we know that's not it. And besides, Daniel was always under the authority of a pagan king. It wasn't through power that God used Daniel. It was through influence. Leading by power or position. Here's the difference. Leading by power or position, it gets people to do what you want them to do, whether they want to do it or not. That's leading by power or position. I want you to do this, and because of my position, because of my authority, you will do this, whether you want to do it or not. Influence is convincing people to do what you want them to do, and they do it because they want to do it. That's influence. Listen, we are flawed, broken human beings, and power in the hands of flawed, broken human beings does not go well. And change by way of force or power, you know this, is never lasting. It never lasts. But where there is influence and people are convinced to change because of what they have heard or observed in somebody else. Now listen, that can change a friend. That can change a mom, a dad, a son, a daughter, a family. That can change the culture of a neighborhood, of a community, of a nation. This is what Daniel had. He had influence. And it's how God used Daniel. The question is, how did Daniel get this kind of influence? And how do we do this? Like, how do we grow in influence? We just get a social media account and put on some videos and talk about your day, your dog, or some recipes, or your workout routine, whatever it is. Did you know that more than half of Gen Z says when they ask, what do you want to do? Like, what's your ambition? What do you want to, like, when you grow up, what do you want to do? And more than half will say, I want to be an influencer. An influencer. And not in the way that you're probably thinking. They're like, I want to be known on social media. I want people to tune in to me and my nonsense. That's what I want. I want to get paid for it. This is what it is. So is that what we're talking? It's not what we're talking about here. But how do you get influence? How do you get influence? Well, looking back over Daniel's life, we picked up with Daniel when he was just a teenager, and we've tracked with him along until he's in his 80s. There are some things, looking back over his life, there are some things that keep showing up. Some things about Daniel that people just could not help notice. And that is 3 things. 1, excellence. 2, character. 3, faithfulness. These things just keep popping up over and over and over. How did Daniel gain influence? He had excellence, character, and faithfulness. First, Daniel was someone who was excellent in his vocation. He was excellent in his vocation. We see it throughout. We see even in chapter 1, it says, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better. He's talking about Daniel and his friends. 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. In Daniel chapter 5, Belshazzar said, I've heard of you, Daniel, that the Spirit of the God is in you, and the light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. And then we just saw in Daniel chapter 6, that Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. And then when Darius had no choice but to throw Daniel in the den of lions, Darius is going, may your God deliver you. Now, how in the world did this happen? How did Daniel get the favor of the king? Was the king a secret worshiper of God? No. He just signed a law to say, everybody bow to me. I'm your God of the month. Treat me as your God. He does not agree with Daniel about who his God is. He doesn't believe the Bible. Darius doesn't go along with the 10 Commandments. And yet he favors Daniel. Even when Daniel doesn't obey his law. Here's what it was. Daniel, because of his faith in God, working for a pagan, unrighteous king, and he did it in such a way that he found favor in the eyes of the king. He worked in such a way that he found favor in the eyes of a pagan, unrighteous king. Christians, this is how we should work. In whatever you do, whatever your job is, a teacher, a mechanic, an engineer, a student in school, a realtor, a stay-at-home mom, a business owner, whatever it is, be excellent at whatever you do. Just be excellent at whatever you do. Be so good at what you do that you cannot be ignored. If you're a teacher and you have a principal who is not a believer, you should work in such a way that you gain the admiration and respect of your principal. If you're a business owner and you have employees that do not follow Jesus, you should run your business and work in such a way that wins the respect and admiration of those who work for you. Because Jesus is with us and his Holy Spirit is in us, we should work in such a way that those who do not believe like us, they should see how we work with such excellence that they will respect us and they are for us because of the way in which we approach our work. Daniel not only was really good at his job, but he also was a man of deep character. Deep character. He says in verses 4 and 5, says the high officials, satraps, sought to find a ground for a complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground for a complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. These guys are out doing what all the politicians are doing right now, right? As a last-ditch effort, they're trying to find all the dirt on their opponent. That's what's happening here with Daniel. They're going through his tax records. They're looking up old girlfriends. They're interviewing old college buddies. And Daniel has such high integrity and character, they can't find anything. If you are going to have influence where you are, you have got to work really hard to be really good at what you do. But even if you're good at what you do and you're a jerk, and your life doesn't line up with who you say you are as a follower of Jesus, listen, it didn't get anywhere. It's like the guy who's really pleasant, full of integrity, yet he's always late for work. He's always dropping the ball. Listen, nobody's paying attention to that guy. Or on the flip side, the one who is driven and ambitious and 15 minutes early for everything, and yet they have some questionable integrity and they run people over to get what they want. Nobody admires that person. It's not about being perfect, but it's about being good at what you do and backing it up with a life of integrity and character that makes people pay attention. Listen, competence will only carry you so far, and eventually character will catch up. I heard someone say it like this the other day. They said competency, being good at what you do, it gets you in the room. It gets you at in the job. It gets you at the table. It gets you in that position. But it's character that keeps you there. But then we see that ultimately what's behind Daniel's excellence in his character is faithfulness. It's his faithfulness. He said we can't find any fault because he's faithful. He's faithful. Daniel's faith was so widely known that they knew the only way to trap him was to put a bogus law in place that would come at his faith in God. And they knew that he wouldn't compromise his faith in God. So they had him. And they knew it because he was faithful. Daniel is in his 80s. He's in his 80s. And once again, he is tempted with compromise. He's in his 80s. He has the favor of King Darius. And here he has to make a decision to go along with the king or oppose the king and lose the favor, which will cost him his own life. In this one decision, Daniel is tempted with two idols that come at you and I. The idol of the favor of people, wanting to be liked by people. And number two, the idol of safety. The idol of safety. I'll do anything as long as it's safe. I'll do anything as long as it doesn't cost me my life. Daniel is in his 80s and he's still being challenged. Here's the thing. The longer that you're a Christian, especially as you get older, there's a temptation to think that the hardest attacks on your life are behind you. That the greatest tests of your faith are in your younger days, the early days of following Jesus. But understand, seasoned follower of Jesus Christ, Satan is not done with you until you see Jesus. He is not done with you until you see Jesus. In chapter 7, Daniel has a vision of a demonic figure he says this, and here's the strategy of the demon. Here's the strategy of the enemy. Here's the strategy of Satan. He says this, to wear out the saints of the Most High God. To just wear them out. Wear them down. The goal here is faith on your last day. On your last day. And so Satan will do what he can to continue to come at you. I don't care if you are 25 or if you're 85. He knows you and he will not stop. Then he's in his 80s. Still being challenged. Listen, we live in a time of like Amazon Prime and instant everything. And we want influence now. Like, give me what I need to know so I can have influence as I walk into work tomorrow, as I go to school tomorrow. I want to know that, listen, Daniel has served for 70 years, and it's his long obedience to God. His faithfulness over the years is what caught the attention of those around him. It doesn't happen in a moment. But day after day after day, you're making decisions at work, at home, at school, in public, and in private. You're just staying faithful. Just staying faithful. Excellence, character, faithfulness. These marked Daniel's life in a culture that hated him and hated his God, and yet he grew in influence. And if you want to grow in influence, these things should mark your life. You work hard and you become excellent at what you do, and you back it up with integrity and character, and day after day after day, decision after decision after decision, you stay obedient to God. But listen, it's not just about, and for Daniel, it wasn't about just having an influence. And it's not just about influence for us, but it's about being a particular kind of influence, a witness to the power of the gospel. a witness to the reality of Jesus Christ. Everyone knows Daniel worships God alone. He didn't keep his faith private. It was a public faith. So what about you? What about you? Does the way you work, does your character, does your faithfulness point people to the reality that you follow Jesus, that the Spirit of God is in you? In other words, does your life stand out? Or do you just kind of blend in wherever you go in this culture? Like when you're at church, you got the language, and you know when to stand up and sit down. You got all of it down. You know what to say. You know what, because you know how to blend in here. And then it's off to work, and it's a different culture, and you know how to kind of blend in there. You go to class, you go to school, you're in the hallways, you're on the team, and you know how it works in the locker room. You know what we do. You know when the guys are together, this is how it goes. Is you just kind of fall in, or do you stand out? Does your life reveal a life that's been transformed by the gospel so that what you believe and how you live, they just line up? Listen, where there is belief but no transformation, it's worthless. So then if you could talk theology and morality but have not been transformed by that belief in your life, then it's worthless. It doesn't mean anything. Listen, you not only are not an influence, you become a joke to the world around you. So what happens? We've seen the church lose its influence and respect in society because we've said this is true and this is right. This is the way God made us to live. This is where our joy is. And many of our churches, in our churches, there's no difference in debt rates and divorce rates. There's no difference in how we give to the poor. We talk a good game, but we're not doing it. We're a joke. Jesus called being someone of influence. You know what he called him? He called him this. He said, you are salt and light. That's what he said. You're salt of the earth. You're light of the world. And you and I are living among people who are in total darkness. And many of them are our friends and our neighbors and our coworkers. It's a husband, it's a wife, it's a mom, a dad, a son, a daughter, and they will never have any light anywhere in the world except from the gospel that has transformed you and me. And it's not that we're just good, moral people who work hard. Because if that's all that people around us get, like he's a really good guy. And she is so sweet. Wow, he works hard. And he's so polite. She is so trustworthy. If people say that, I hope they say that. I hope so. Awesome. But if that's all they get, then we've missed it. But when you do things in such a way that connects the dots, that when people look at you, they don't just see the kind of person that you are, but they begin to see the kind of God that you worship. And that's only going to happen by opening up your mouth and talking about Jesus. Sharing the good news of Jesus, making the connection. You want to know why I am what I am, and I work the way I work. You want to know why? It's because of Jesus. Let me tell you about Jesus. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. I grew up in 80s, 90s Christianity, and we got really weird at this. I'm just going to call it out. We got really strange, just really weird at doing this. Like when I was growing up, here's the method we taught. When we talked about evangelism or sharing the gospel, like this is what that was in the church that I grew up in. It meant on Monday nights, like all the adults show up at church, and we're going to pray together, and then we're going to go out in groups of like 3, and we're going to go to random houses. We're going to knock on the door. When they come to the door, we ask them the question, if you were to die tonight, do you know where you'd go? Now, you think about that. I don't know if we ever really considered what it was like to be on the other side of that conversation. Like, I'm a stranger at your house. If I were to kill you right now, do you know where you'd go? Heaven or hell? This is what we did, and we called that evangelism. And we felt good. We, tapped ourselves on the back, said, I shared the gospel. I did it. Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. But listen, we've got to. We've got that background, but it doesn't have to be weird. It doesn't have to be awkward. Listen, it can be you initiate this conversation like this. How can I pray for you? Last Sunday we call it Serve Sunday, and those that handed out groceries. We went out, and one of the things that we just did was like hand them a bag of groceries and give them this card. It says something like "You matter," or something like that, or "We're better together." And on the back it says, "How can we pray for you?" And we would ask the question, "Is there anything we can pray for you about?" And there were a couple houses we went to, and it was like, and they were like, "Yeah, absolutely. Look, can I tell you this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." And we prayed right there on the porch. Like, it's just like. Just asking somebody, "Hey, can I pray for you? How can I pray for you?" It doesn't have to be strange. And so maybe this is something you do. Maybe you go to someone, maybe somebody that that somebody you have a burden about, and say, "How do I open up anything kind of spiritual or anything with them? How can I pray for you?" And they may say, "I don't believe in God." And you're like, "I'm not asking you to believe in God. I'm just wondering, is there anything going on in your life that I can be praying for you about?" All right, well, I've got this thing going on at work. I got this thing going on at home. I got a kid who's lost their mind or whatever. And then you come back to it. You say, "Hey, I've been praying for you. How's that going?" And then maybe you say something like this. "Hey, as I was praying, I thought about this verse in the Bible. Maybe here it is. You might want to look it up and see what you think. I don't know." Before you know it, you're having a conversation about the Bible, about God's word. Listen, your story may be different. Never once have I asked someone if I could pray for them, and they're going, "How dare you want to pray for me?" Never once. But whether you recognize it or not, you need to know. Listen, I know we all got different personalities and different things going on, and I get it. Listen, more than you understand, I am more introverted than you could ever imagine. Like last night, we were at a wedding, okay? And my excuse for not dancing is I'm Baptist. I'm sorry. But honestly, I'm just an introvert and I'm weird and awkward. And so they started dancing, and then we were in an outdoor venue, and they started closing the doors, like the big barn doors. I'm like, I literally told my wife, "We got to get out of here. They're going to close us in." So, and I had to feel like I got to preach tomorrow. I'm sorry. You guys have a good time, But listen, I get we all got different personalities, and when we start talking about bringing up conversations about Jesus, it feels really strange. But you have got to know, whether you recognize it or not, you need to know that when God saved you, he saved you for this. This is what he saved you for. I know we want to take it, and it is true. He saved us from the punishment and the payment for sin and of hell. Yes. That comes. But what he saved you for is to be on mission. It saved you for is to make Jesus known. For this reason, to show the people around you who Jesus is through your life and through your words. When Jesus told the disciples that they were the salt of the earth, think about it. This was early on in Jesus. They hadn't been friends for very long. They hadn't followed Jesus very long. He's going, "Hey guys, you are the salt of the earth, the light of the whole world." That had to feel crazy to them. These uneducated, poor followers of Jesus early on in his ministry. You are the salt of the earth. Not the salt of your town, your community, your family. You're the salt of the whole earth. And you are the light of the world. Not simply the group of you, but you alone. You going out. You're the light of the world. That's insane. But look, Jesus wasn't simply just trying to spur them on, he wasn't just trying to inspire them or motivate them with this. Jesus was saying, "I believe that you can do this. I have confidence that you can do this." Why? Because I know the power of the one living in you, who was raised from death to life. And here's the crazy part. That's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did. We find out in the scripture that they turned the world upside down. These uneducated idiots turned the world upside down with all of their failures and all of their inconsistencies. And now Jesus is saying to you and to me, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And I believe you can do it because I know the one who is living in you. Listen, you don't need to go buy a bullhorn and stand on the street corner. You don't need to go start a social media following. You be excellent at what you do. And you live a life of character and integrity. And stay faithful to Jesus. And along the way, just tell them about Jesus, the one who this is all for.